Good evening. You are listening to episode number 14 of Framed and Bound, a podcast where bookish people discuss films set in the literary world. I'm your host, Tobias Carroll. Last episode, we covered Can You Ever Forgive Me?, a story about one writer experiencing a personal and professional crisis. This time out, we'll be looking at a very different film dealing with some of those same themes. Specifically, we're going to talk about writer-director Radha Blank's 2020 film, The 40-Year-Old Version. It's an autobiographical film about a playwright, played by Blank, who reconnects with her childhood love of hip-hop, even as she navigates an ethically dubious opportunity that could raise her artistic profile. It stars Blank, Peter Kim, Oswin Benjamin, Welker White, and Reed Birney, and it's available to watch on Netflix. Joining me for this episode is Caroline Hagood. She's the author of several books, including Filthy Creation and Weird Girls, Writing the Art Monster. She is also the translation editor at Hanging Loose Press. Here's what we had to say about The 40-Year-Old Version.
It's been so much fun rewatching this movie and thinking about it again.
Yeah.
So that we could talk about it. There's so many different things that it has to say about authorship and writing and struggling, and I would also say humor. And it was just so much fun.
Yeah, I would agree. It's also, so how did you first encounter the 40-year-old version?
So when it first came out, you know how there's those movies where everybody who like really knows you tells you you must see this thing or you must read this thing. And I know from seeing all the things that you're writing all the time and reading that I'm sure you get recommendations just all the time.
Mhm.
But there's always those few people that you really listen to. If they say to you, like, I don't care if you have a deadline. I don't care what you have to just set aside time and read this book or watch this movie, and you will just go do it.
Yeah.
So, and you'll find that time. And so it got to be where it became almost a joke in my life where everybody was telling me I needed to see this movie. Like everybody who mattered to me. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
everyone, not everybody like famous people, saying it on the news, but it was like people who I really cared about and who really understood what excited me or what interested me and the really weird things that I enjoy. Uh, and
Yeah.
so I saw it, and I fell in love with it. And I think they were bringing it up to me because I'm such a big fan of sort of like remix culture of stand-up comedy as being viewed as strong creative nonfiction writing, of hip hop as an art form, that needs to be treated, more like poetry, that needs that kind of recognition. And also just, I love to laugh while taking in my sort of deeper truths or the theory that I think that I do see in this movie, but I don't want to be hit over the head with it. I want it to come, a little at me a little bit slant. I want it to be funny. I want it to be engaging. So all of these things together made it very much just a blast to watch. And I also have found it's a great comfort movie for me. Um, like the scenes of her crying in what is her real apartment actually,
Mm.
um, like crying there after she has a disastrous reading, or performance
Yeah.
of kind. Like it's so familiar to me, given that, I've had these readings where it's like only my mom was there, or whatever it is that are just like so very sad. And I
Yeah.
come home and I'm like, in my apartment.
Yeah. The eating of one's feelings in that scene too was just like, I was like, oh yeah. Yeah, I've been there. I've
It's
been there.
too real. It's too real. Her, and her, yeah, just all of it. And so I found it very comforting to watch when, because I mean, it's also about a artist, a writer, at midlife,
Yeah.
and like they haven't made it, which to be perfectly honest is everybody that I know.
Yeah. Well, and I think it also has it also, it's kind of you know, takes a pretty big swipe at the sort of way that youth is fetishized. I mean, the Radha Blank's character in this is the winner of a 30 under 30
Yeah,
award, and
there's a lot of like, well, it's been a while since then, and uh yeah, which is, I mean, it's something that always frustrates me, that like, I have friends who are 5 under 35 winners, and I think it's great if you are doing great work at that point, but like it feels like such an arbitrary thing to sort of say like, well, you know this is what's happening here, and this is we're going to kind of establish this very random cutoff, and certain people are just not going to be, I mean, my first book came out when I was 39, and so it's like, all right, cool. I am I am not ever going to be a 5 under 35 or a young lion. Just gonna have to deal with that. But it is this weird, like, it is this very frustrating, kind of thing that I think this definitely reckons with, in a lot of ways. I mean, one of the things that I thought really, that I thought was pretty great about it, and is the way that while it is a very, very, very specific, I mean, it's an autobiographical film with several people in it playing versions of themselves. It's also, almost this very archetypal take on like an artist in the middle of a professional crisis who revisits what drew them to their love of their craft in the first place. I mean, there are these, both in the scene with her agent and the scene with her brother, like, we're reminded that, like, hey, she's always like, her embrace of hip hop isn't this like very, later in life thing. This is kind of getting back in touch with what made her an artist to begin with. And yeah.
That's right. Just, yeah, so absolutely, like, to respond to your first point, this idea that, everyone's obsessed with this artistic prodigy idea, of this like 20-year-old with the $3 million book deal, and
Mhm.
and they're gorgeous. Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah,
inevitably they're gorgeous. And there's this whole like shiny thing attached to that. And then there's kind of the rest of us. Do you know what I mean? Then there's sort
yeah,
of like reality that most artists do live in, of not being gorgeous, not being 20, and still having to make the work, and still being able to make things that are exciting and edgy. It's not as though you get older and therefore you can't be groundbreaking or innovative anymore. If anything, I think there's an argument to be made that she would make, saying, we grow, we get more brave, we get more complex, there's
yeah,
more to us. um and definitely, I think you're so right, because the movie references how the character Radha was like rhyming from a young age, but in reality, that is something that she's done, since she was young, that she was returning to, and she also did spend time actually doing these live performance shows as Rodimus Prime, like Radha Blank, the real,
yeah,
actually, I was going to say screenwriter, but she did everything for this, right? The
yeah.
auteur behind this, as she might be called.
I,
She really did that.
I assumed, when I was watching the end credits, there's some footage that plays over it, including one of her in concert, and
Right.
I kind of assumed that was her watching the actual Radha as opposed to the cinematic Radha performing, but I could also be totally wrong about that, but that's,
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And just how interesting it is. So I think that she started doing the rapping again in adulthood, in real life, after being fired from one of her screenwriting jobs.
mm,
And again, it's very relatable. And I also just, on all the movie has to say about gatekeepers.
yeah,
And I know from your entire career that this is a big thing for you. Like, we are both independent press, independently
mhm,
published. Our presses are indie presses. And there is that sense to which, there's these gatekeepers, and then there's what you do, what you can do because you've stayed independent, that she talks about a lot. And of course, there's also the white gatekeepers that she's really looking at in that movie. Something
yeah,
that Erasure and American Fiction has recently looked at, most recently, that really resonated. But of course, it wasn't the first movie or book to do so. And, she's also, of course, looking at this question too, when she talks about being like bathed in white ladies at these, at these like, at these like, at these like place events that she needs to go and suck up to people, or,
Yeah.
the Whitman character. Like, I would venture to say we all have a Whitman character, probably many, who we've interacted with, who is kind of like the kingmaker or the queenmaker, whatever you want to call
Yeah.
it, that you meet, or you have this opportunity to meet, and you feel like they hold your career in their hands, and they appropriate certain things of you, or they want you to, for, in her case, write the Harriet Tubman musical. But this sense to which it's not really who you are, but you want to be that person so that you can have this career. And then the point in which, at your career, in which you go back to your roots and say, look, this is just who I am. I'm going to write this weird book. If only 10 people buy it, 10 people buy it, and that's it, which I've certainly reached.
It's one of the things that really struck me. I mean, it's the sort of gatekeepers. I mean, it's interesting because you have Whitman, who is clearly just, I mean, probably, is to the extent that this film has a villain, he is clearly, I mean, he's not
Yeah.
just tone deaf and horribly, just oblivious to this, but he's also portrayed as like being actively predatory towards her agent.
Right.
And there's also, it's actually, you know, I was actually very, very throughout very impressed with like the way that Radha Blank used cinema, there was like some of the ways that certain scenes were shot and edited, and even the shift to color in the final shot, which I thought was gorgeous.
Yes.
Um, but there's the scene early on, the scene at the party that ends up going very wrong, where Whitman is talking to her, and the way that it's shot is like his like very sort of gestury things are, it looks like he's groping her essentially.
Or like about to hit her or choke her out himself, as
Yeah.
you do. Like
And it's
there's
like,
aggressiveness or a violence to it. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and it's just like, and it's like, okay, this was a very clear choice to frame this shot in this particular way, but it also is very evocative of, both the underlying dynamics and the fact that this guy isn't just oblivious, he's a creep.
Yeah.
And even if he's not going to be a creep to her because he's gay, like he's still going to be he's still that sort of transactional, there's that like awful transactional nature of everything that he does. um at the same time, I think it's also great that Blank wrote a screenplay where it's not funny, but like when I was looking at a lot of the cast, a lot of the cast members, I was kind of like, do not have Wikipedia pages, so I would look them up on Google, and and it was almost all just like people where it's like, oh, they've been in this play on Broadway, they've been in this play on Broadway.
Right.
And it's
And
just,
her brother.
yeah. And there's just, I mean, it's a very, for even for the characters who are played somewhat ridiculously, like these are also like, they're clearly given just, you know very, everyone in this gets a very, has a role that I would imagine was very fun to play. I actually wanted to single out Welker White, who plays the director of the sort of breakthrough play, who just has this absolutely ludicrous monologue about what the role of soy milk will be in the production, which
I
is
would
just,
also say that soy milk is one of the villains in the movie.
and it's just like, and she's just going on, and it's just like, this is absolutely like, I I it's just like, you look it up and it's just like, how was just like, were there just a dozen takes where just everyone on set just absolutely lost it? Because I don't know, like she just has that conviction of like, this is, soy milk is going to be so important to this play, and it's like, oh my god, this is madness. No, stop talking.
It's so
But
funny, but also we've all been in like workshops or something writing related where we
mhm.
actually were given that monologue, where
Yeah, oh
somebody,
yeah.
You know what I'm trying to say? Where somebody like very self-important is like, okay, now I've brought in some holly and I'd like you to write about it and you're going to find your soul in it. And we're all like, okay, let's find our soul. It's like, and like we've been there, we've done that. That's real. The thing is that those scenes feel so real to me. I've not been specifically in the playwriting world, I've not been specifically in the filmmaking world, but if you've been in the writing world, if you've been in the quote unquote art world in any way, if you've been a quote unquote creative, what a terrible word, but if you've done any of those things, then you've met these people.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I also just really enjoyed the running the running joke in this about all of the really awful sounding productions of plays where I think there were early on there's the multiracial revival of Fences.
Oh my gosh, the all woman version of 12 Angry Men.
Mm-hmm.
Also made me think of the Amy Schumer. There's an Amy Schumer episode where she sort of plays on that. And so to me, I was thinking like, oh, is there any connection there? But just yes, hilarious. And as though because this woman director has done this all women version of 12 Angry Men, she's somehow set up to speak to the racial issues in Harlem Ave. Do you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? That's
Yeah.
all. The other thing that was being bandied about is like different kinds of marginalized stories. So, well, she's done this feminist take, so clearly she can take her soy milk sensibility and apply it to Harlem Ave, and it's going to be racially sensitive, culturally sensitive. And it's like, no, it's not.
Yeah. Yeah. Um,
Like she's a culture warrior with her soy milk. You know what I mean? It's like, no, that's not the
yeah.
case.
Yeah.
And the movie's going to capture that in a very funny way. It's not going to hit you over the head with it, in some, because this movie could have been a theory course. Do you know what I'm
Yeah.
trying to say? Like it's got everything in there. It's incredibly smart. It has so much to say. It's about auto theory and it's about auto fiction and it has everything in there, but it doesn't do it in that way, right?
Yeah.
It's funny, it's light, and it really makes you think.
Well, I think there's the scene in the beginning where she's talking to the other theater director who's kind of doing more uh producing more black playwrights and everything else. And in his own what he is, I think, he is also portrayed again as this very ridiculous figure in a lot of ways. As shown by the scene where he's instructing an actor on how to kind of tap into her inner phoenix. But there's the whole scene where he like
Ancestor scene.
she's like, the ancestors don't want me to get paid. Can you talk to my ancestors this time? Which is just great.
She's like, my aunt really wants me to pay my rent. I know the ancestor scene is like comic masterpiece.
Yeah.
And the roof's leaking on her head. But I actually think it's so interesting because it's contrasting the various kinds of gatekeepers and the various people trying to tell these stories and the different ways they're doing it and the ways that they all have also, there are things about them that are funny, or difficult or drawbacks, even like the implications about his budget that we can see in the fact that there's a leak on her face. It's like he's trying to stay true to himself and to his sort of heritage, and therefore he's in a leaky building. So these kind of subtle ways that we're getting this kind of commentary without her turning to the camera and saying, "Oh, do you notice that he's not as well funded as Whitman?"
Yeah. And it's interesting, and I don't know if this is just logistics or not, but I mean, it's also a little bit telling that and this is probably, I think a subtler commentary on the role of sort of hype in art, but the theater where Harlem Ave is eventually produced at in the sort of very big ticket production is really not that much larger than the theater.
That's right.
This sort of more nonprofit, space. It's just a question of kind of the hype.
And the demographic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Although it's interesting to me. There's one thing, and I as a white dude, I cannot really go too far into unpacking this, but I think it's interesting that the scene where Harlem Ave, where we actually see Harlem Ave and you see all of the stuff that she has put into it to kind of uh appease her producer, and the very, and the much more, the fact that it ends with the with a or that involves a character being murdered, and that there is this kind of falsely imposed solidarity between the two lead female characters and everything else. At the same time, it's, you know there are the scenes of audience reactions where there are like two older white women who again, it's just like, get some of the film's funniest lines, but they're also like dancing when there's a hip hop song at the beginning of the play, where it's just like, oh no, this is the definition of, this is what the kids call cringe, isn't it?
Yeah.
But there are also, I mean, and I think I actually kind of, I found it interesting that, like, there are characters who, like her students, who are also responding well to parts of it, and
That's right. That's right. They show the audience, and that's right. And it's sort of like, it's not just the out of touch white characters who are moving their heads to the music or responding to some of the
yeah,
emotional cues of the play.
yeah,
Does kind of throw into question, like, I think that's a great point. Her students' response is really interesting. Of course, part of it is that they see themselves on stage,
yeah,
but they could have also been like offended, what I mean? They could have been like, well,
yeah,
that's how I am, so that could have been like a risk,
yeah,
to portray them. And they could have said, well, this isn't, you've used me in this way, in this terrible sellout play, but they didn't. They seemed to be receptive. So it is interesting to think about what sort of like what we're supposed to think of the way they show the audience's reaction. Is the play as horrible as Radha perceives it to be? And I mean, like, yes, I think mostly, but it's interesting to have those little moments of joy that people do seem to be getting from it that
yeah.
aren't just out of touch white people.
My read on it was kind of that, like, was just that it's like, okay, she is a good enough writer that, like, even in a kind of watered down state, like, it's still going to be, um
That she's still in there,
yeah,
that she's still in there, like even her selling out form, and this is something interesting too, that in a lot of things where artists were forced to sell out for whatever reason, or forced to do things in a certain way so the thing would get made, you can kind of put the Easter eggs in there. You can kind of put some pieces of yourself, some authentic things in there, that still will, so that the big audience is still going to like it, but there's still pieces of who you really are, pieces that are innovative or edgy or risky, or even activists can be sort of, you could stick them in there a little bit. So that I wondered about too, is that, it is some of her coming through, even if most of her isn't.
yeah,
But like you said, it's hard, it's difficult to unpack what the meaning of that scene was. But regardless, I think it deserves sort of like a deeper look, as I
yeah.
think.
It's also, and again, I think this speaks to Radha Blank's generosity as a writer. It's also interesting that, like, the scene where her agent is backstage and he's looking for Radha. At one point there's a scene where the two female leads of the play are both, and it's kind of funny because we've only ever seen I mean, we've seen the black actress in the play, the character, confront Radha about, like, hey, this is the
Right.
changes, and it's clear that she's been involved with this project for a while. And we've really only seen the white actress kind of in character as this very oblivious,
Yeah.
what does a girl have to do to get some soy milk around here?
And really another villain, I would say,
Yeah. But it's interesting that, like, in the scene where the two of them are in their dressing room, they're both kind of doing the same vocal exercises, and it's kind of like, okay, like they are both, like, these two characters are also both, still working on their craft, are both serious about their craft. Like, the the blonde actress, is the character she's playing is kind of ridiculous, but, like, the actress actually seems to be, like, you know pretty okay. And it's kind of, I think there's also that, and I think there's also, both for her and for the other actress she's doing that with, it's like, it's interesting because it's like, maybe that, maybe they're both just like, Jesus, why do we both have these incredibly, which you kind of get from the one scene, from the one seen earlier, but it's like, yeah, you don't. And this is a film about a playwright, not a film about an actor. So it's like it would be. I could also see how a 3-hour film to go to suddenly, but there are these scenes of there are these reminders of other people's creative struggles as well.
Right.
Something that we see with the character of Dee, especially, who one of the reasons we find out that he's drawn to Radha is that like he enjoys this, that she's a good writer and she's actually put some thought into the words, and like,
And he says, and when his friends are like, "Oh, why are you hanging out with this old lady?" He's like, "Well, at least she's got the storytelling, which you don't have when you're performing."
yeah, I mean, it's an interest there's an interesting there's the scene at the end where this is kind of, not that this is really a spoiler abounding movie, but there's a whole scene where one of the running things in the film is that Radha has been putting off getting back in touch with her brother after the death of their mother. And there's a scene finally at towards the end of the film where it was actually again did a really nice job of just using cinematic language, because there's a point where I'm like, you see her buzzing and I'm like, wait, where? And I'm watching this, I'm like, wait, where is she? Like, this isn't her apartment, this isn't Dee's apartment,
Yep.
this isn't the school. And it's just like, oh, clearly this is her going to see her brother, this thing that like we've been told about the whole film. And there's them going through their mother's artwork, and they say, something like, she came to New York to be
Right.
a famous artist, and what happened. And it's like, well, but she did still, and it's like the sort of unspoken thing is like, well, she did get to be an artist. It just, and to some extent this work has survived her. I mean, and there's also the conversation about their father, who like had worked as a plumber when he, which literally led to his body being scarred as a result of it. But it's like, it is, I think, this interesting, and it's the perennial question, I think, for anyone, the like, is it worth it to just do the work, or is there something more, which I also think, unfortunately, is a very American reckoning. You
Yeah.
may have seen the thing that was floating around on social media, I think last week, about I think Ireland like doesn't tax the incomes of artists under 50,000 euros, which is just like, oh, that would be nice, wouldn't it?
Oh, how lovely.
You know, um, but it's and it's um,
Yeah, that scene where they go to the apartment and they're looking at the art, and she says something like, she came to New York to be a famous artist and now all her work is going into storage, or, all the work they can't fit on their walls is going into storage.
yeah,
And then he says, but she lived this rich life. She was an artist. She was able to have this, multifaceted life. And then one of the things that he says too, which had a lot of it kind of resonated with me, is he said, but she said we were her greatest creations,
yeah,
about the kids. And, that also had so much resonance to me, just because, there's been so much art monster discussion with women in the
mhm,
past years of like, if they're a mother, is that the only thing they're supposed to create in this whole thing? So that also had a lot of meaning to me, because I was like, yes, she did those creations, but also her art was very important to her.
yeah,
And then I think it also touches on, of course, this question that you're saying. And frankly, it's sort of the one that we all have to come up against. That's at one point or another, which is, especially when you hit middle age, right? And
mm,
you're not 20, whatever, you're not 16. And you're suddenly like, you know what? I'm probably not ever going to be a famous writer.
mm,
And yet it still has to matter. It still matters to me,
yeah,
because I do it in a sort of process oriented way. Like, this matters to me because I do this work. And for me, I always say this, but it matters to me because I'm building this community, where I'm helping students, and I help edit other writers, and I help do these things where it's not all about me. And those things kind of help me feel like, basically not lose my sanity up against the fact that no, most people are never going to read my work. That's just the name of the game. But
yeah,
it doesn't mean that the work is worthless. And I think this movie now the irony is that Radha was not that well known when she made it, and now she is because she made this movie. But the message of the movie was it's okay. This is enough. It's enough to make the work, to do the work. And you can laugh about the ways that it's not received, and it doesn't mean you need to stop doing the work
Yeah.
if it's not being wildly well received.
Yeah. Yeah. I I mean, it's yeah, and I think speaking with the community aspect of it, I mean, you kind of see that both in the story of the film with the dramatic the class she's teaching in playwriting, and the way that
Absolutely.
she's able to finally, the sort of subplot there of her, why did these two students get into a fight early on, and it's like, oh, because they're actually kind of secretly in love with each other.
Yes, yes. And she facilitates that.
Like there's the scene where one of them is looking at the other during the play, and like again I'm gonna just keep coming back to just the cast of this, but like she's looking at her with this look of just absolute like just raw longing, and it's just like, oh man, like just so well done, and like I mean it's also interesting to me because there was a point about I was watching this and so it's like she gets into hip hop and she's records with D and she goes to the showcase, and then in maybe like gets high and is nervous and then just absolutely bombs in the worst
Oh, she's like, yeah,
possible, like most
yeah,
excruciating way.
yeah.
Um and like there was a certain point where it's kind of like, okay, we're only halfway through the film, like what's going on? And then with her relationship with D and the way that develops, and like you kind of, it's like, oh, this is kind of going to a place that I didn't expect it to go, which I which I appreciated, but also, um, it was an interesting look at just oh god, I've kind of lost the point that I was making there.
Community, worry about the community.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yes. Yeah. So with the community both, and I think you could kind of get that sense again, both within the story of the film, and again with the like, you know, clearly the cast looks like it's almost all people who have been doing work, on and off Broadway for years, if not decades,
Yeah.
and and who are just doing, and who clearly, are just, again, I would imagine a lot of the casting in this was, was done for, was done for, was done in a very particular way. And like, again, there's sort of that sense of a community there as well. I felt
For
like it was.
sure. And the way she interviews and talks to the characters in her neighborhood, I also thought was just such a great thing. It's like, there's so much writing, not writing, there's so much interactions we have as writers that are not going to go onto the page, that are just for us, that we're not going to tell anyone about because it can't all make its way there. But it stays inside of us and it's still our creation, it's still our interaction. Her interactions with those neighbors are amazing. I love
Yeah.
those scenes so much. And yeah, you really get it. And also her interactions, I don't want to be like pretentious here, but like with the city, this whole like
Oh
the
yeah.
city,
Oh, absolutely.
the city's a character, but her walking around New York and the way that it informs her art, and the way that she also, I know that she grew up watching, Spike Lee, but also, and she almost treats it like Voldemort. She calls him Schmutty Schmalin instead of saying Woody Allen, because of course all the things, that he's,
Yeah.
all of it. But I think it's interesting that she takes on something like Manhattan that Woody Allen's done, but almost like reclaims and reappropriates it, to be this feminist and this different cultural message, very much against what Woody Allen was doing in Manhattan, this underage girl and all the stuff,
Mhm.
but still has that, that black and white and those sort of magisterial shots of the city. And she's saying, look at this community of people, right? They deserve this magisterial treatment.
Yeah.
They are beautiful and sophisticated and full of art and creativity, and they deserve to be heard. And that whole thing, like at the very end when she's like the 40-year-old version, finding your own voice, like this whole thing, and she's really giving a voice to all these community members as well.
Yeah.
So I found that so beautiful, and such a message about, look, it's not all about the artiste, it's about the communities that the artist is moving through, and all these people, who make the movie happen, make the play happen, all the different people.
Yeah. I mean, it is, and it is clear that this is a film made by someone who knows that world, because this is something that weirdly came up in the discussion on the podcast many episodes ago of Wonder Boys too, but it's a film that is also aware of like writers not working in a vacuum, and I think that was a film that I think was very very aware of the role that agents play and that editors play, and with
And
this
teaching again.
yeah.
Yeah.
And this again, and this is also like, the her friendship and her personal and professional relationship with her agent. I mean, the scenes of all of the role that the different producers play in it. And I think, one of the things that weirdly rung true, even though I don't know the theatrical world, is that like Jay Whitman, for all that he is like, just again, like, the closest thing to a villainous character in this, he is also someone, like, it also seems very true that like that kind of character would also just be willing to forgive the being choked at a party, because probably he can then spin it somehow to sell the play, but even better, and just
Yeah.
like
It can become part of the mythology of the play making.
yeah. So yeah, and that just felt like, I mean, yeah, it's a film it's a film that, I don't know too much about how plays are produced, whether on or off Broadway, but this felt very this rang true, and it felt very true that it's like, for all that it is a film about the struggles of an artist, it is also a film that is a reminder that like artists do not make art in a do not necessarily make art in a vacuum. Some of it is, and I think again that kind of goes to her forays into music, but even that's collaborative.
That's right.
And it's just well done. I mean, it felt lived in the best way.
It did. And it brought together so many of the genres that have inspired her in this kind of, it's almost like the movie itself is a mixtape, so it has playwriting and it has filmmaking and it has, hip hop performance. And it made me think a lot about, in our MFA program at St. Francis, we have a lot of performance poets.
Mhm.
And it made me think a lot about that genre, right? Of like, I'm used to reading my poetry or my fiction or whatever it is, and I just sort of read it straight. And then they follow me on the stage and I see what they do, and it's just a whole other genre. It's incredible.
Yeah.
And so it really made me think about that too, of like, what happens to writing when it meets performance, right?
Mm.
So like not just on the page, but when it becomes, hip hop, or when it becomes a play, or when it becomes a movie, because that's something that our books, unless they're bought up, right, and ever, but like don't do yet,
Yeah.
or on their own, without lots of help from industry people. But so that's a really interesting thing about it made me think about the nature of performance in that way
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually, thinking back, it's like when I was in college, this was around the time when the slam poetry scene was a really, really big
Yes,
deal.
yes, yes.
And like one of the guys, he was not in the department I was in, but he was in my friend and roommates, they were both in dramatic writing, was like someone who, again, like had did was a pretty big name in that world. And it was interesting looking back on that. It was actually also, in 2016, I was at the Mission Creek Festival in Iowa, and one of the musical headliners was Saul Williams, who obviously has
Yes.
and I will actually also say I caught some of his set, which was great, but I also very much appreciated that like there was a book fair, because I was doing some book fair stuff there as well, and like Saul Williams spent a lot of time just going through the book fair, and spent, I don't want to say spent a fair amount of money, but like was definitely picking stuff up that looked interesting to him, and I was just like, okay, this is This is
Wow.
this I actually got to I was selling some stuff for a friend of mine, and I was just like, Sarah, Saul Williams just bought one of your chapbooks, and she was like, got this like text back with like, lots of exclamation points. But it was like, but it was
Sure.
also just nice to just be like, all right, cool. He is still like, this is a guy who's been in this world and is still just like seemingly buying a lot of books on indie presses. Like this is good. Like this feels I feel pretty good. I feel pretty good about that. Like it's nice to, nice to see you're still checking interesting stuff. And it was like, and the stuff, from what I could tell, the stuff he was picking up like was pretty good. Was pretty good. I was pretty into it.
He had good taste.
Yeah. Yeah. I this is I know this is not exactly shocking news. So says,
But it's good to have it affirmed.
yeah.
Confirmed.
If he had been walking around with like 50 Shades of Grey, I would just been like, no.
It would be a different narrative, let's say.
But yeah. So I don't know. That's kind of all I have in terms of notes. Although I actually, that's not true. I did.
Do you have a bonus track?
There is a scene early on in this. There's a scene where she's. I can't stop. I'm sorry.
We're losing it over here.
The scene where she's like finds herself staring at the guy's butt on the subway.
Oh my gosh, the white man with the black woman's butt, that she calls it.
And then she's meeting with her agent, and then she sees another guy.
Another one.
I just have butts written down in my notes here.
And she's like, it's an omen. No, that's the thing. The movie is hilarious.
Yeah.
Like it's not lightly funny. It really is laugh out loud funny. Even during its most, I don't know, sad or serious scenes, it's still there is pretty much a laugh in every scene, which is easy to accomplish or to balance.
Yeah.
And to make sure that the humor is always in the service of bringing out something important about the movie, that's really hard to achieve. And I think that it does do it, because the humor should be like this, the scalpel that helps to chisel a scene, or however you want to put it. It's a terrible metaphor. But basically that it should do something. It should perform something, speaking of performance.
Yeah.
And I definitely felt like it did, it had that wonderful fitting element.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, the double butt scene is a classic.
Yeah.
Two thumbs up.
There again, just like, yeah, the I'm just thinking too of some of the I think the other awful sounding play revival was, I think, the all male Steel Magnolias is something.
Oh my gosh, yes. And that's used as like don't worry, this director's going to be good for you for Harlem Ave because, whatever it was. And she's like, great. It's just, and it's just spot on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I agree. I said I was going to mention this before, but like I was reading a little. I have not done too much reading on the film, but I read something that like more of this had been shot in color, but it was ultimately.
And it was going to be a TV show initially, or so a web series and then TV. Like it went through different phases of what it was going to be, I think.
But like, I just loved, there is a moment in there's the final scene of Radha and Dee kind of walking down the street. He has bought her a bag of Funyuns, which just, again, small details.
Brings it full circle.
Yeah. And she's still dressed, wearing the sort of fancy outfit that she wore for the play's opening. But there is, and in it, because of kind of the time of day, it's like you don't, the color flowing into the scene is very subtle. But one of the things that I absolutely just kind of blew my mind is like, you see the color of her dress is, it kind of looked like this sort of hazy diaphanous white when it's in black and white, and you realize it's more of like this like almost sort of purple periwinkle shade, and it's just like that little detail where it's just like, and I don't know, it felt like it. I sound like I've just eaten an edible, and I have not eaten an edible, but like
I
it sounds.
I only like to talk to people who sound like they've just eaten edibles, though. So
But it just felt like that. It felt like that shift said so much about like that shit, those shifts in perspective, and like what you're seeing and what you're not seeing and what you're taking for granted, and like I just.
and perspective,
Yeah,
which I think the movie's very much about. So I
yeah,
don't think I don't think you're going off on a tangent. I think it's very intentional.
yeah,
This sense of like it's a perspectival shift, right there at the end. And we're like, and it makes you go like, oh,
yeah,
that's what color it was, right? So it's this like other level
yeah,
that doesn't require an edible, right? Although an edible might enhance it.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it might be good. We
It,
might have to do another podcast where we talk about it post edible.
it's it's funny to me that because I had seen, I mean, this movie came out first, but I had not seen it until now, and it's and I was thinking a little bit about the movie Past Lives, which I also loved, which is
Yes.
also about the sort of personal and professional struggles of a playwright living in New York. And I think it's kind of it's very interesting, and I think I think it was interesting because I'd seen some or listened to some reviews of Past Lives that compared it to You Hurt My Feelings, because they were both like A24 produced films about a female writer living in New York, and I could kind of see that, but I really think like this this Past Lives and this are a little bit more in dialogue, because a they're both about playwrights, and b I while I like Do You Hurt My Feelings, I don't think it's quite as like, I don't know if it clicks quite as well. It like both this and Past Lives felt a little bit more like authentic just from a literary point of view. And I think in both cases it's like they're both playwrights doing autobiographical work, so it's like that kind of makes sense that like um but it's interesting that both films kind of the the finales of both films in very different ways involve kind of the protagonist walking down a street and kind of a door and whether it's open or not, and kind of again like I think I I don't know what the draw is for like double features about playwrights in New York, in modern New York City, but I think the two of them would make a really fun double feature. And
Yeah.
you'd also just, and they're also both really good. Like it's a double feature where it's like, oh, you will hopefully like both enjoy this in a way that it's not like, okay, you're gonna get one really good movie and one of these is not gonna be so good. It's like you will laugh and you will cry, and you will maybe think a little bit more about the creative process.
I would love to go to that screening and have the directors there to talk about it.
Oh man, that would be so good.
Right? Should we
Yeah,
make this happen with our incredible power that we have in the film industry? I'll bring the edibles. You can get the directors there.
amazing.
It would be
Amazing.
it would be really fun. We'll put this on our bucket list.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So did you have other comments, other thoughts?
I think that's mostly it. Just the way that she portrays the writing process. Just shots of her writing on the subway. Is very obviously very familiar to any sort of New York writer.
Yeah.
Uh, Even the way she uses the subway and the city as inspiration, and then you can kind of see the way it feeds directly, like the double butt scene is a great example of where we've all gone around and just found so much that fuels our writing, whether it goes directly into it or indirectly into it. I just think she captures that so well, and also just the hilarity and the sorrow of creative failure.
Hmm.
Just how that goes. And just the way she puts it all together into, as I already said, but what is essentially this amazing mixtape of all these things.
Yeah.
Um, is why I really wanted to talk with you about this movie.
Yeah. No, I'm really glad you pointed me in the direction of it, because I had not seen this before, and I remember.
Oh, I'm so glad.
I mean, I think it probably I believe Netflix first released it in the fall of 2020, and it's just like, right, this probably explains why I did not watch it at the time, because
It
I,
was a crazy time. Everybody was having a crazy time.
yeah.
I mean, yeah.
And I'm also not sure, and I'm honestly not sure if, like, at that point I would have. I think I'm in a better place psychologically now than I was then, so I think it also just would have. I'm maybe glad that it took a little bit of time just to wait on it and check it out now.
Yeah, it's well, because it could, if you're not in the right mindset, this film could hit you hard. If you've lost
Yeah,
a parent recently, if you're struggling creatively, if you're having a midlife crisis, for instance, all of these things, which,
yeah,
you know, again, I'll be honest, all three things I've gone through recently. So yeah,
yeah,
it maybe not a midlife crisis, but this time in my life where I'm no longer, as we were discussing, a 20-year-old. I'm never going to be a 20-year-old writing prodigy, and I really have to accept that. But really all of these things, yeah, if you're coming at it in the wrong mindset, it could be not quite so funny for you
yeah.
as a movie. Yeah.
Do you have any? Do you have to kind of close out? Do you have any projects of your own you'd like to talk about, plug,
Oh,
promote?
well, it's funny you should ask, Toby. Um, I do. So I have a book called Death and Other Speculative Fictions. It's an essay and prose poems, and that's coming out in December of 2024 from Spite and Duyvil Press.
Nice.
And that's actually about, losing my father and using speculative fiction as a way of kind of sort of dealing with it. And then my other book, Goblin Mode, it's basically like an auto fiction piece where it's a character that is and isn't me, but then there's an actual goblin in it. So
Amazing.
it's called a speculative memoir. So it's basically like there's elements like, she's a teacher in Brooklyn who's also a writer and a mom, but there's this goblin, right? So it's like it's coming out in fall 2025 from Santa Fe Writers Project.
And that brings our discussion of the 40-year-old version to an end. I would say that it accomplishes the rare feat of being both an accurate description of the creative process and an eminently watchable film. If you haven't already seen it, hopefully this podcast will inspire you to do so. It's really, really good, well worth tracking down. I mean, it's not even a track down situation. If you have a Netflix subscription, you can watch this, and I'm guessing probably most of you do. So, in our next episode, we're going to change direction a bit. Ian S. Maloney will stop by the podcast to discuss David Fincher's The Game. As always, if you enjoyed this podcast, please leave a rating on your podcast app of choice. If you have any comments, requests, book recommendations, movie recommendations, you can email us at framedandboundpodcast@gmail.com. And as always, our theme music is Arvid Franzen and Eric Berg's Life in the Woods of Finland via the Internet Archive. Thanks so much for listening.